Yeah, well, I think to a certain extent, I mean, whatever language we use, China is a huge state, but one that doesn't have this missionary impulse. Again, maybe it's a Christian tradition, or maybe more recently, Democrats have this view that we want to promote our ideals for the rest of the world. China basically has never had this strong missionary impulse. Let's first secure order and harmony and minimize material deprivation in our large state. That's going to be the key issue. And the idea, and then maybe we could think about working with other countries, especially large, powerful countries, to deal with the world's problems. But the idea that China would want to export its political ideals is just pretty foreign, to Chinese political traditions. And so I think that's a fundamental difference, with the West. Where, I mean, I'm from Canada. I had this same view, that there's only one legitimate way of selecting leaders, and that's democratic elections. Even though it's a fairly recent view, but this deeper missionary impulse goes. I think it's much more deeply embedded in Western culture and history. There isn't that in China. I think that's important to understand that.
It's often portrayed though as if though it was, and as if though, especially in this China threat literature of like, oh, China will come and make us Chinese.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's important to look at what the leaders say and what's being taught in schools. And there's a very good study recently by David Kong and others, and they summarize it in a recent article in Foreign Affairs. It shows, well, let's look at what the discourse is and also what's being taught in schools. And none of it's about we want to replace the U.S. as a dominant global hegemon. It's saying let's secure our borders, including Taiwan, and we try to do well within that kind of area, and maybe collaborate with other interested parties in the rest, in the rest of the world on issues like climate change. But the idea that China would want to be a global hegemon in the way that the U.S. is now, I mean, nobody says that. I mean, why would they think it if the leaders don't say it, and if it's not what's being taught in schools? It's a complete imaginary, fabrication, by people who are hostile and don't understand, China. To be a bit blunt, yeah.
No, I agree with you. It's and I'm sorry that we are drifting towards the international relations part, but also one of the flaws with the analysis of John Mearsheimer, who I highly respect and who I think is a brilliant analyst, but one of the flaws is that it assumes that every great power will naturally react the great powers in Europe used to act toward each other. So the open question is, will it? I mean, will it China necessarily out of its size act like everybody else?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have great respect as well for him, but I think that history and culture matters, and when it comes to thinking about how great powers will act, they're not just all these machines who operate according to the same principles. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the setup of China, because it is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual state. I mean, it is so extremely diverse in addition to its sheer size, right? That to keep this together must be a constant struggle and be extremely difficult. And we see how even, it took China a long time, a very long time, both Chinas, by the way. It took both Chinas, the one in Taipei and the one in Beijing, a long time to even just accept that Outer Mongolia, is not part of that China. But the rest was kept together. Now, how large is that threat to China as it stands today? Because the history of the Eurasian continent is also a history of large states falling apart. Is that there? I mean, is that
well? And this is where political culture matters too. I mean, if you look at the Warring States period before China was unified, you had diverse schools of thought. It was called 100 schools of thought, whether it was Confucianism or legalism or Moism or Taoism and others, but they all share the same ideal, that the ultimate ideal is a large country, one large political community that's unified. Now, the Confucians saying within that we should have much more diversity. The legalists saying, no, we want order, and it's a kind of almost totalitarian rule where everybody thinks and acts the same way without room for dissent. So you had different views, but they agreed on this view that the ideal is a huge unified political community. So even when China has, fallen apart, so to speak, but there's always been this drive to reunify. So, and then more recently, 1920s and 30s, when China was, broken up and almost and civil war and different warlords and different foreign powers were occupying different parts of China. It's a horrible memory. So I don't think that there's a serious worry about China breaking up. The major issue, of course, is Taiwan, and if foreign powers, especially the U.S., allows Taiwan to promote its kind of independence view that some people hold, well, that would be, frankly, a disaster that could lead to war, because of these memories of China breaking up, and they're afraid that if Taiwan goes, well, other things could happen too. So that's the one worry. But other than that, I don't think there's a major threat or worry that China would break up. But the real question is, or not real, another important question though is, within this unified community, how much diversity should we allow? And again, this tension goes way back in Chinese history. Again, I alluded to earlier, where the Confucians would favor much more diverse and pluralistic view, and whereas those who are more influenced by the legalist tradition, Fajia, favor much more sameness and uniformity. And maybe now we're moving towards a more legalist phase, which is, to my mind, not as desirable, since I'm more committed to Confucian ethics. But I don't expect it to last forever, because intellectuals generally, which there's tens or maybe hundreds of millions in China, tend to prefer a much more open environment and diverse environment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we do see moments in which also the general public expresses views. So maybe that's another question. How does this information go up and down? Because one of the things that surprised me the most in the last 5 years is that really the only country on earth where mass protest changed corona policies was in China. Mass protest is what even violent, and then overnight, within 3 days, policies changed. That I haven't seen that in Western Europe or North America, anywhere else, but in China it did. So at some level, the top level does actually listen to what's happening on the ground.
Yeah. So on social media, there's tons of criticism, and some of which is open, and others is more veiled. And sometimes people exchange things on WeChat, and then it gets shut down. But then you open another account on and it continues. So there's a lot, and in private meetings among intellectuals, I mean, it's very, very, very open criticism usually, especially if they trust you. But of course, there's still, I served as dean at Shandong University for 5 years, and I very much enjoyed it and have great respect for the other leaders but the overall trend of increased academic censorship, and also increased censorship more generally, it does weigh on intellectuals, and that's not a very healthy for the long term, and I don't expect it to continue.